Graphic business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting. It's third quarter already, and we're having our third conversation for this year. Interesting topic to discuss. Living within our means, an imperative for economic success. And I think that this is the most prudent topic for the moment, seeing the kind of stress, economic stress, we have been under the whole of this year. We were just recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw its impact on the economy. And then there was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you know what that has done to our economy as well. The city depreciating, Ghana's rising debt stock, the impact on the economy. We are struggling, I should say. And recently, we had to take a decision to secure a program with the International Monetary Fund. And all of this calls for a real look at the way we approach our living when it comes to how much we spend, what we spend on, what we, put on our budget. The government has had to also adjust its budget, increase taxes to make up for revenue shortfall, stuff like that. And this is not just about the government, it's about individuals, it's about businesses. And so how do we manage our spending? How do we adjust to the current circumstances when it comes to our cost of living and ensure that we are in a good place? We want to begin, first of all, Prof, I'm going to talk to you for you to paint the picture for us on where we are at when it comes to the economy. As I said in my introduction, there's a lot happening and why it has become crucial for us to talk about managing our living standard and our living expenses and also living within our means during this time.
Well, thank you. And good morning to your viewers. Yes, our economy currently is severely strained. As you rightly pointed out, coming from the COVID pandemic, the impact that it had on this economy, and then being aggravated by the Ukraine-Russia war, means that our economy currently, the fundamental is shaky. We've recorded very large fiscal deficits over the last 2-3 years. Debt stock is currently around 78%. We are paying about a third of our expenditure to interest payments, servicing debts. Amortization hasn't come. About a third is going into compensation, and then about 18% or so going into statutory. That alone constitutes about 151 or so percent of our tax revenue. So that really means that there's no room, there's no fiscal space at all for government to do anything. And also happening at the back of sudden withdrawals, sell-off of our bonds by non-resident holders of our debts, meaning that putting, pressure on the currency. So you've seen the currency depreciating so fast, so steeply. The demand for the currency is high. We've also seen crude oil prices going up, which is really affecting export prices of crude in Ghana, and the implication that it has on our supply chain, the transport fares going up, right, affecting food prices, and therefore inflation also skyrocketing. So really we are in a very dire situation at the moment as a country.
And Mr. Franklin Mensah, apologies, I got your name wrong. So Franklin Mensah, financial consultant. It looks like it's going to get worse. Just days ago, we saw the S&P downgrade our credit worthiness, and it looks like we're going to struggle to even raise funds externally to support our economy. So this makes this conversation crucial. And so what does it mean then to live within our means?
Well, we are going through very tough times for the private institutions or private businessman doing business. They're actually feeling it at this point because most of their projection is off, and then they are struggling to figure out their way forward because getting a facility to even run their business operations day to day has become very difficult. So with the current forex running the way it is, it has probably put a dent into what people are planning to do at this point.
Yeah, and so when we say living within our means, does it necessarily mean maybe cutting down on spending? What are we looking at, Prof? Your mic?
Sorry, two ways. I mean, first you have to look at the size of the cake, and then you have to look at what your needs are, right? And so living within your means, meaning that you have to cut your coat according to the size of it.
Well, somebody,
right?
this morning I said that on radio, cut your coat according to your size. Somebody says now it's cut your coat according to your cloth.
Of course, I mean, all of it, has the similar meaning, right? So if it's according to your cloth, then the size of it matters, right? The size of your cloth matters a lot to how your cloth design and everything will be like. So it's essentially being able to match your revenue, or your expenditure to your revenue, so that at all times you have to make sure that you spend not more than the revenue that you have generated. But sometimes it's difficult, for a country like ours, where there's so much pressure, on government to provide certain key amenities, road building, hospitals, schools, and all the other things. And so when you look at the cake alone, it will mean that we will not be able to do a lot of things. So governments sometimes are forced to then spend more than the size, the cake, or the size of your cloth, as you said. And that will mean that you have to go out there to borrow to supplement the revenues that you have collected. And that has been the bane of the economy. The fact that we don't generate much, we don't mobilize enough revenue, and we seem to be very expansive in terms of our expenditure. Our fiscal policy is too expansive. We spend, we like there's so much appetite to spend, and without looking at the revenue, the size of the cloth. So over the years, we've been doing that, and we've been having debt accumulation. The issue is not about the debts or the size of the debts, because, every country borrows, right? The key issue that we have is about the interest payments.
Yeah.
The interest payment, where you are paying or you are using about 50% of your tax revenue in paying interest. Then how much do you have to do other things? Because you are paying also salaries, which take close to also about 50%, and then the statutory payment. So at the end of the day, the two, tax revenue, compensation, and then your interest payment takes more than 100% of your tax revenue. So any excess expenditure will mean that you have to borrow. And mind you haven't talked about goods and services, that you need to do investment in the ministries and all those kind of things. You haven't talked about capital expenditure, that you need to build roads and those schools and all of that. So these two, you have to borrow to be able to service it. So living within your means is really a difficult concept for us, given the size of the cake that we have.
And Franklin, living within your means is difficult when you can't even predict the future. For instance, businesses couldn't predict there was going to be a pandemic. We didn't know that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Now we've got to deal with rising inflation. We don't know what the figures would be for July when the Ghana Statistical Service puts it out. Now, the city is going down as well, and so it makes it difficult to really plan, to really even put together a budget and stay within the budget in the first place.
Yes, for a private sector, for a businessman or probably someone running a business, the rate at which the forex, because most things are pegged to the dollar. So all the projections that the businessman has made or probably run their business has become very difficult. So living within your means is not an easy thing for a businessman to cope with at this point. At times we say bite on what you can chew, but in this instance, we are even swallowing more than we can even, so it makes it very, very difficult. The projections are off, but I'm very hopeful that with time we will be able to get a good grasp on what is going on right now. But we are in tough times, but hopefully things turn around very quickly.
Well, hopefully things turn around very quickly. And I just this question just came to mind. So living within your means, does it also mean that lowering your standard of living? Does it necessarily mean that?
Not necessarily. I mean, it also means that you making conscious effort to expand the base, right? To mobilize more revenue. Because you have to be able to spend. You cannot say that you're not going to build roads. You cannot say that you're not going to build schools. You cannot say you're not going to build hospitals. It will mean that the economy grinding to a halt, right? So what you then have to do is to make sure that you mobilize enough revenue. You have to be more aggressive at mobilizing revenue. And you also have to be more efficient, even in your expenditures, ensuring value for money, right? In the little expenditure that you have to make, you have to make sure that it is impactful, it is transformational, it is going to help you to generate more revenue to increase the size of the cake.
All right.
That is what it should mean.
We've got to go because the conversation has to start in the main hall. Once again, it's the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting. Thank you so much, Professor Eric Osesibe. Good to see you once again, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Ghana Economics Department. Also, financial analyst Franklin Mensa. Sorry, I got your name wrong initially, but
okay.
Yeah, we'll engage later on. And so, yeah, the conversation is going to continue. Living within our means, an imperative for economic success. This conversation is going to get underway. Once again, welcome to the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting. If I could do this quickly, just run you through the guests for or the guest speakers for this morning's breakfast meeting. Dr. Humphrey Eyim-Dake, who is president of the Association of Ghana Industries. Dr. J.K. Kwache, Director of Research, Institute of Economic Affairs. Hamdia Ismaila, General Manager, Venture Capital Trust Fund. They are on the panel this morning. And so I'm going to hand it over to Winston Amwa, who is going to moderate the session. And so let's have the conversation. Let's see if we can reach a conclusion on how we can live within our means during these times. Over to you, Winston.
Access to your news at any time and anywhere. Graphic Communication is giving you the opportunity to have news not only in hard copy but also in a digital form. Yes, you can have access to news at all times and even before they reach the newsstands. Simply download the Graphic News Plus from Google Play Store on your Android and App Store on your iOS device and get your digital news from your favorite daily graphic, Graphic Business, The Mirror, Graphic Showbiz, Junior Graphic, and Graphic Sports. Download your Graphic News Plus now and choose your preferred package daily, weekly, monthly, and annually, and access free news on various interest areas as well. Visit us on graphic.com.gh for further information. Graphic News Plus, connecting people through news.
135 billion, almost 40 billion Ghana cedis deficit. Well, if you are concerned about that, I'm sure you'll be more concerned if I told you that compensation, that's the payment of wages and salaries, amount to 37 billion Ghana cedis, and interest payments 41 billion Ghana cedis, with statutory transfers amounting to 23 billion Ghana cedis. These are non-discretionary expenditure, and it takes you to 101 billion. What it means is that your total revenue and grants cannot take care of your non-discretionary expenditure. So, what about the discretionary expenditure? Your capital expenditure and transfers to other agencies. Can we really live within our means? That is the conversation today, because for the 18th time as Ghana prepares to get onto an IMF program, it's got many of us concerned. It's got many of us worried. We've talked about why must we always go to the IMF? Why can't we, as a sovereign nation, independent for that matter, live within our means? What happened to the much touted, much talked about, moving away from taxation to production? Well, we'll find answers, because this morning, our team of experts will be helping us understand whether we can live within our means, what we must do to live within our means. We'll discuss the role of the private sector and the role of financing. My name is Winston Amwa, and I'll be in charge of this ceremony. Thank you. So we'll get to the welcome address now, and we'd invite the Managing Director of the Graphic Communications Group Limited, Atu Afo to give us the welcome address, and we'll welcome him with a round of applause.
Our chairman for this August gathering, the chief executive of Stanbic Bank, Kwame Sumening, our expert panelists, our distinguished participants, ladies, gentlemen, herein gathered, our audience members across our digital and media partners. It is always a privilege to have the opportunity to share a comment with you this morning on the theme, living within our means, imperative for success. My fundamental question to all of us is this: do we wish and want to attain this? Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot continue to wish for one thing and pray for something else. The structure of our economy, sometimes referred to as the Gettysburg economy, is at the heart of the difficulty that Ghana has faced over the decades. We extract and export with no meaningful or consistent value addition. Consequently, others who have patient capital and are willing to invest extract all the premium in what we labor to produce. Let's be minded. The problem didn't start today. We cannot and will not be anywhere near the self-sufficiency we seek, beautifully couched in our current vision, Ghana Beyond Aid, if we don't have a rethink, plan, and change, and importantly, do. We must resolve to make a choice, to take a chance for our lives to change. In the week gone by, I made 3 notes on my digital handles, which I wish to restate. 1, lessons in life will be repeated until they are learned. 2, don't cling to a mistake just because you spent a lot of time making it. 3, when life feels unbalanced, a shift is on the horizon. And I believe that we're herein gathered to look at that shift that we wish to see. The progress we've made and the positive new initiatives and the momentum that we've seen across the economy over the past several years give us reasons for optimism. However, the ongoing Russo-Ukraine conflict, following on the constraints of the 2020-2021 COVID-19 pandemic and the recent headwinds in our economy, may give us a clue of what the real world looks like. The associated impact in global freight costs has impacted our cost of landing imported products and production inputs, including the cost of hydrocarbon fuels on our economy. And this is really interesting when we extract and export some oil, gold, cocoa, manganese, bauxite, amongst other products, including critical human and intellectual capital. And another few notes I wish to make are the following. 1, within every income, it is said there is food and there is also seed. Let's learn to plan for the day of drought. I had the pre-discussion speak to some of these things that we need to learn to cut out. That proverbial cut your clothes according to your size or whatever that may mean. 2, we seem to be a very prayerful people. And so we should be minded that when we pray for rain, we also have to deal with the mud. When it rains, there is mud. Discipline, consistent work, ethics, a healthy work ethic, and a commitment to deliver value is key to changing this construct that we speak to every day. 4, we need to promote the involvement of critical stakeholders, some of you are herein gathered, in each strategic sector in policy design, planning, implementation, monitoring, and the assessment of the policy's impact on the outcomes of the living standards of our people. And a country that very few of us knew of, which is now in the global forethought, Ukraine, as an illustration, has a land size of 604 square kilometers, which is only 2% of Africa's 30 million square kilometers. Its pre-war 40 million population is barely 3% of Africa's 1.3 billion. Africa has the largest arable land, yet we have to wait for wheat, sunflower oil, other grains, including even copper that we extract from portions of Africa, including the Zambia, the Congo area, and all of that, to go into Ukraine and bring it back to make wires for us. So for me, this session is critical, and I believe that the experts that we've herein gathered and those of us who will be making contributions to our discussion need to guide us to a place where I think that, 1, we need a lifestyle audit, a mindset shift, and a complete rededication to consistently implementing the ideals of some of the fantastic visions that we have actually identified. It's not new. It started when I was growing up as something they called Operation Feed Yourself. Some of you who are my age who need to now wear glasses to read. A few years ago when I showed up here, I wasn't doing that. I saw Operation Feed Yourself. I heard about a certain domestication program. And now it is Ghana beyond aid. To attain that economic independence and success we desire, I believe God has blessed Ghana enough. And as we keep on saying in our national anthem, God bless our homeland, Ghana. So distinguished guest, our honorable chairman, I'll leave this podium for our expert panelists at this point. But I believe that life gets better when we react less. We've been too reactionary in the way we've been approaching our conversations and our big strategic shifts. And we need a certain shift on that, and I believe that we'll be getting to a good place. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very much, Atuafo, who is Managing Director of the Graphic Communications Group Limited, welcoming all of us and setting the tone also for the conversation. We need a shift. But what will be that shift? We will find out here at the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting. And having heard from one of the partners, it's important to hear from the other. So let's, with a round of applause, welcome the Chief Executive of Stanbic Bank, Kwamina Asumening.
Good morning, Professor Eric Osei-Sibe, the chairman for this morning's event, Mr. Atuafo, Managing Director, Graphic Communications Group, distinguished panel members, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. Gratitude, as always, must go to the Graphic Corporation for always bringing very relevant topics of discussion to the fore, and for partnering with Stanbic to create this forum for thought sharing within our community. This morning, that topic of discussion is living within our means. In our current state, this is an incredibly weighty topic. Some might even claim it is brave of us to decide to create space to openly talk about issues of financial management and its impact on sustainability and stability. So let me lighten the mood a little bit before we delve in. I come from a fishing village called Apam. The natives call it Apa. some 85 kilometers from here. And I have fond memories of time spent splashing in the sea as a kid, with or without clothes on. Skinny dipping, I think they call it. I only mention this because as I reflected on today's topic, a famous quote by Warren Buffett, one of the world's foremost investors, sprang to mind. In it, he says, "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." The reason why this anecdote is relevant is that it gives us a pictorial depiction of what can and often does happen when we as individuals, as corporates, or as a nation do not live within our means. Let's start by being honest with ourselves. Ranked according to our GDP per capita, we're not the wealthiest of nations. Because of this, we must be acutely better at mechanizing our trade-offs than those nations ranked as wealthier than ourselves. The idea of trade-offs is one of the most basic principles in economics, that in order to have more of one thing, we must accept having less of something else. This principle also implies that in order to circumvent what might sometimes be difficult trade-offs, we must explore alternative revenue sources. But is this what we do? At an individual consumer level, our habits and behaviors today, especially where spending is concerned, will inform how we live tomorrow. When we as consumers live beyond our means and the monies which fuel that lifestyle are not our own, we can reasonably expect the chickens to come home to roost at some point, because that lifestyle isn't really ours. It's simply a mirage. At a corporate level, while clients may have access to lending, part of our role is to protect them from developing an appetite which exceeds their financial capacity. We do this by holding them to account against contractual covenants that are set to serve as guideposts within which debt sustainability is assured. Those contractual covenants also help to ensure the buildup of appropriate buffers to cushion against unexpected shocks. Shocks are an inevitable part of our existence. For us as individuals, these shocks might come in the form of the sudden, unexpected passing of a loved one. At the corporate level, a business owner might be sideswiped by the premature need to replace his or her generator. At a macro level, or for the sovereign, catastrophic events such as the 2008 liquidity crisis, or the 2000 dot-com bubble, or the 1997 Asian financial crisis, or indeed, more recently, warring European nations, might be enough to level the proverbial house, which was already built on shaky ground. The reality, according to what history almost guarantees, is that a shock may well be looming. So how do we begin to create a consistently stable environment which can absorb these inevitable and sometimes cyclical shocks? At an individual level, this might mean holding back a small percentage of our income during the stable periods, a rainy day fund, if you like. At a corporate level, would it require us to continue scenario planning, stress testing, and prudent budgeting to ensure that our debt-equity ratios remain within reasonable parameters? Is the answer in being able to consistently manage the trade-off between our desires today versus our needs tomorrow? In doing so, can we organically build a buffer which prepares us for the unexpected? For the sovereign, because the notion of easy money and the accessibility of borrowing is strong, the temptation to fly close to the sun can be very high. How can we at that uppermost level realistically expect to effectively self-govern and self-manage when we're dependent on our own awareness and disciplines to alert us to any financial distresses that might be on the horizon? Is the answer in somehow mirroring the rigor and discipline offered through contractual covenants at the corporate level? I don't think it's controversial to say we should be mature enough and introspective enough to hold each other to account or to be a critical friend. Is it not the very reason that boards and regulators exist? There is nothing wrong with challenging what has evolved into the status quo, if that status quo has the potential to lead us down a thorny path. It is our job today to be honest, to be authentic, to be introspective, and to be critical in order that we might move the needle even just a little bit so that Ghana and her people can thrive sustainably. I am really looking forward to this morning's panel discussion and hope that we will yield, at the very least, some perspectives which stimulate further constructive debates outside of this room and encourage us all to make shifts which can benefit us all individually as well as collectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kwame Nasumini. Also asking the question, why spend what you do not have? Why pay 41 billion Ghana cedis as interest payments when your tax revenue is 74 billion Ghana cedis? More than 50% of that goes into just the payment of interest. We're getting very close to the conversation. We'll start the discussion shortly, but first let's introduce our chairman for today's occasion. And our chairman is an associate professor of economics. He is in the person of Professor Eric Osei-Sibe, who's also a member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Good morning. It's a privilege to be here, and I wish to thank the planners of this very meeting for the honor done me for asking me to chair this very important meeting. So thank you, Mr. MD Graphic, and thank you, Mr. MD Stanbic, for this opportunity. Yes, I think this topic is really suitable, it's apt, it's timely, given the current economic situation that we found ourselves. Once again, Ghana is seeking assistance from the IMF to do what? To be able to settle our payments with the rest of the world. And that means they're coming in to support our balance of payment situation, because our payout is more than what is coming in. And this situation is not new, as you all been told. This is about the 18th time that Ghana is going to the IMF. And in fact, it's averaged about 4 years. On every 4 years, since independence, we have been going to the IMF. And come to think of it, just 2001, thereabout, when we went to HIPIC, we went to HIPIC for our debts to be forgiven. And the debts at the time, the total debt that was forgiven was just about $4 billion. So at the time, 2006, when we were leaving the the highly indebted poor country regime, we actually had our debt, which was just about $760 million, way below $1 billion. And in fact, it was just about 25% of GDP. Now, within a period of 16 years or so, our debt level is currently around 56 billion or so, and that's about 78% of GDP. If you are to do the metrics, it means that we have actually increased our debt stock by about close to about 7,000 or so percent. So that really underscores the much deeper structural economic problem that we have as a country. We often over-rely on primary commodities. Our exports commodities are is at the mercy of the global or international market, demands and supply, so the prices are very volatile. Fiscal, we don't seem to have governments don't have that fiscal discipline to be able to ensure that the revenue that we generate here are just enough for our expenditure. Our governments over the years have tended to be very expansive in their fiscal policy. And therefore, what that means is that we seem to be within a vicious cycle of debt, fiscal deficit, interest payments. Because what happens when we spend more than what we generate as a country, it means that we have to borrow. And borrowing, for me, that is not a problem. I mean, every country borrows, right? But the key issue for us as a country has been the interest payments. And as my brother behind me just mentioned, the interest payment is overwhelming because these interest payments, which is about a third of our expenditure, okay, and about 50% of our tax revenue, mean that we are just crowding ourselves out, or government is just crippling itself from ability to spend on relevant sectors of the economy that will generate further revenue. And so our revenue that will generate will be lower, our expenditure will be higher because of the interest payments, and therefore, on and on, we always have to borrow in order to be able to meet our expenditures. And that really is a problem for this country. So largely, fiscal discipline, the structure of the economy, the fact that we have huge imbalance, our balance of payments imbalance has been a bane. We seem to have too much appetite for imported products, and so our imports always outweighs our exports. So we then always have to make up. Now, our borrowing, if you look at our borrowing, currently, the one that is really explaining the situation that we are in now is the fact that about close to 50% of our debt is being held by foreigners. And what does that mean? It means that your country become overly sensitive to investor sentiment, global investor sentiment. It means that you become very vulnerable to external shock. So whenever there is any shock, you will see that your country is not able to withstand. And we've been experiencing these sudden withdrawals. It didn't happen today. The issue has been that over the years, we have not sought to build a strong, a very resilient, a diversified economy. So we seem to be moving in circles, as I mentioned, in a vicious cycle. We put one foot forward as a nation, then we take 2 foot backward. So we don't seem to be making enough progress. Now the question is, how do we come out of this quagmire that we all face? I think that government has a role to play. We are talking about we being able to spend or live within our means. Yes, we have to live within our means. But the question that I ask is, what is that means? What is the size of that means? What is the size of the cake? It matters. Okay? If you don't have enough cloth, and you say, cut your coat according to the size of the cloth, can you wear the cloth? No, you can't wear it because the cloth size is too small for you to wear. That is an issue, okay? We have huge demand as a nation. Our fiscal expenditure or infrastructure demand is huge. Everyone is demanding roads. Everyone is demanding hospitals. Schools have to be built, right? Our labor force want to have good salary. Of course, they have to. They have to have good salary. And so putting all these together, you realize that the obligations on the part of government and also the seemingly gap, okay, the graft and the weakness in our public financial system also fueling the situation, meaning that there is a lot of wastage in the system. So the high demand, the wastage, coupled with very low revenue generation, means that we always have to be having large fiscal deficit, and we always have to go out there to borrow in order for government to be able to meet this. And as I was saying, this is a responsibility of government. It's a responsibility of us as a citizen to collectively think about how do we turn the corner. How do we ensure that we enlarge the size of the cloth, the cake? And how do we ensure that our government are fiscally disciplined to making sure that they always look at the size of the cloth before cutting the cloth? It is crucial, it is important. And this definitely calls for a multi-stakeholder dialogue, engagement, like we are having today. So I hope that all of us will be free to express ourselves, to hit the nail right on the head, because it is a collective responsibility. We all have to make sure that we turn the corner. We manage our economy in such a way that we will not, in the next 4 years, have to go back to the IMF, as the cycle has shown. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very able partners, if I may say, to discuss these issues with us. I'm sure that the MC will introduce them, but what I would like all of us to do is to make this session a dialogue, a very interactive section, so that in the end, we will be able to have some key recommendation that will put forth for consideration of government. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity to chair this session. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Eric Osei Esibe, who is a board member of the Bank of Ghana and also an associate professor of economics. He's asked very, very important questions. What is the size that we're dealing with? When we say, let's live within our means, I started by asking what would constitute living within our means. Now, are we prepared, for instance, to maybe lower our expectations and our demands of government? That's a question we should be thinking about. One of our panelists says, we are not ambitious in setting targets, revenue targets. How ambitious can we be? And where would we get that money from? Do we get to pay more taxes? Do we get to block the leakages, as we have been talking about ever since I was a little boy in this country, and still talking about? What is the difficulty in doing the very things that we believe must be done in order to ensure that, one, we raise enough revenue, and two, live within our means, so we don't get to pay 41 billion Ghana cedis as interest payments? And if you've looked at it, every year it increases. And so while we are concerned about 41 billion this year, we probably may have to pay more in 2023. Time now for us to introduce the panelists for today's conversation. And the first panelist is the Director of Research at the Institute of Economic Affairs. He was Director of the Bank of Ghana. Now he's been a member of the Monetary Policy of the Bank of Ghana. He was a member. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. John Kwakye. Thank you very, very much, Dr. John Kwakye, for accepting to be part of the discussants for today. The next person has over 20 years' experience in finance and investment, with over 13 years' experience in venture capital and private equity funding. She has supported the venture capital and private equity ecosystem development through education and influencing policy and regulatory outcomes for the industry in Ghana. She is currently the General Manager of Venture Capital Trust Fund, where she oversees the investments and general operations of the trust. She holds an executive certificate in private equity and venture capital from Harvard Business School, a Master of Public Administration from Columbia University in the city of New York. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the General Manager of the Venture Capital Trust Fund, who's agreed to join us this morning and speak on the most important topic of being able to raise finance to support all. Let's welcome Hamdia Ismaila. But even as we talk about, the discipline to live within our means and financing, one important role is the role of the private sector. How do they intend to help all of us achieve that which we've talked about all the time? We say we need to be self-sufficient. But if we have to be self-sufficient, the chairman asked the question, which if I am to rephrase, says, who owns the Ghanaian economy? Is it owned by us Ghanaians, or is owned by foreigners? I'm sure we all know the answer, and we know how that has impacted us. This morning, we're joined by an astute businessman, industrialist, and management consultant with a career spanning over 22 years in management consulting, industrial packaging, mining, bulk haulage of industrial raw materials. He's the founder and chairman of Red Moon Resources Limited, an industrial resources, mining, and bulk haulage company. He's also the chairman of Hamdak Industrial Packaging Limited, an industrial bag production company to date, and also the president of the Association of Ghana Industries. Let's welcome Humphrey Eyim Dake. Thank you all for making time to join us. We'll be starting the conversation. And in starting the conversation, it's important for us to actually start from the discipline to live within our means. The discipline to live within our means, the implications for external borrowing, and drawbacks and way forward. And we start with Dr. John Kwakye, who is the Director of Research of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Dr. John Kwachi, tell us the discipline. How can we be disciplined as a country to live within our means, and what will be its implications for external borrowing, the drawbacks, and the way forward? Please pick up, just sit there, pick a microphone close to you, and you can then, tell us what we can do. Okay, just a minute, let me get you.
But how many? Hello? Thank you so much. How many minutes do we have? I thought they said we're going to make short presentation.
Yeah, short presentation of 5 minutes, and then when I have a question, I'd ask you.
Oh, okay. So let me start by saying that today's discussion is timely because it's taking place at a time that Ghana is facing a serious financial crisis, as we all know, forcing us to seek IMF bailout. Well, living within a country's means, or what we call fiscal discipline, is an important guiding principle, because if you don't practice fiscal discipline, you cannot avoid financial crisis, or in fact, you can even get into bankruptcy. So it's a very important guiding principle. Now, what it requires is that, well, most governments, I must say, spend more than their revenue, because in life, your needs are always, more than your resources. So most governments, record budget deficits. But it is the size of the deficit, that becomes an issue. Because the higher the deficit, the higher will be your borrowing, and then you will be accumulating a lot of debt. Well, this is not the first time that we've been in this situation and have had to go to the IMF. In fact, people say 17th time, others say 18th time, but whatever number you choose, that's quite, high. But the fact that we've been going to the IMF all these, times tells us, that we've not been practicing fiscal discipline. In fact, Ghana indeed has a long history of very high fiscal deficits if you compare us with our peers. And let me give just a brief example. I extracted, fiscal deficits, from the IMF Regional Economic Outlook of April 2022, this year. And you compare Ghana with the rest of sub-Saharan African countries. There's an average number for the period 2010 to 2018. That's over about 8-year or 9-year period. Now, Ghana's average fiscal deficit over the 10 or 9-year period is 6.6% of GDP. Now, sub-Saharan Africa, which includes Ghana and the other 44 other countries, over the period have an average of 3.2. That is half of Ghana's. Now, in more recent times, 2019, Ghana's is 7.3. The sub-Saharan African average is 3.9. 2020, the IMF has put us at 15.6, 2020. Sub-Saharan African average, 6.4. This is under COVID, okay? 2021, 11.6 for Ghana, 5.3 for sub-Saharan African countries. Now, the IMF has even done projections for this year and next year. They've put us at 8.7 for 2022. The average for sub-Saharan Africa, 4.7. And 2023, 7.8 for Ghana, 4.2 for sub-Saharan African country. So you will see that for this entire period, from 2010 to 2021, 2022, Ghana has consistently has a higher, much higher fiscal deficit than the rest of 44 other countries in Africa. And of course, your deficit feeds into your debt because you have to borrow to finance the deficit, and that's how you accumulate a debt. So if you look at the debt figures also, 2010 to 18, Ghana has, this is in terms of GDP, Ghana's average is 47. The average for sub-Saharan Africa, 35. 2019, we are at 62.7. The average, 50. 2020, we are at 78.3. The average, 57.4. 2021, we are at 81.8. The average, 56.9. Now, 2022, IMF has projected 84.6 for us and projected an average of 55.1 for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. But so I'm giving you these figures to show you that in a way, we have not been able to manage the economy, much, as prudently as our peers have done. In other words, we have been living far beyond our means. And that's why we have accumulated, so much debt. And you see, it is not even the debt stock that is an immediate problem, because you are not going to pay your entire debt today. But it is the servicing of the debt. Is because you have to use your revenue that you are collecting to service the debt. And when it comes to that, the debt service, as we have heard from other speakers, has become very burdensome for Ghana. In fact, recently, if you look at even 2021, we use about 45% of our tax revenue to service our debt. The entire revenue that we collect, we use 45% to service the debt. And it means that we are left with 55%, for every other thing. That is not a comfortable situation to be in at all. In fact, we are in a situation where we have accumulated a large amount of domestic payment arrears also. We have arrears to contractors. We have arrears to the statutory funds. We have arrears to national service personnel. We have arrears to NAPCOP. We have arrears to, nursing trainees, arrears to teacher trainees. So we have accumulated a substantial amount of domestic payment arrears. We are also told, when the IMF visited recently, that they issued a statement that we may be close to not being able to meet even our external debt payments. Now, our sovereign debt has been downgraded by credit rating agencies. Investors are disinvesting from our bonds, okay, and our access to, I'll be finishing in a minute, and our bonds, our access to the international capital markets has been virtually blocked. So that is what has taken us back to the IMF. So in the course of the discussions, I think we all have to be looking forward to, what will get us out of this situation. And then especially, what do we need to do such that we do not relapse into this situation again, so that we may not have to go to the IMF 20th time. I will never say never. We can never say you will never go to the IMF. As a member of the IMF, you can always go back to them for financial assistance or policy advice. So I will never say never. But I hope that we do not go there as often as we have done in the past. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwachi. But you ended by asking two questions. What can we do to get out of where we find ourselves now? What must we do to ensure that we don't go back often to the IMF? I would start, that question from you, and also add my question that says, what is the size of our means? So we're talking about living within our means. We need to have the discipline. What is that discipline we're looking at? What should we be looking at as the size of our means within which we must spend? And I'll start with you, Dr. Kwachi.
Well, okay. Before we went to the IMF, some of us had argued that if we were going to be bold enough, to take some of the measures that we know the IMF will recommend for us. I worked at the IMF for 10 years. I know them very well. So we anticipated that there are certain measures that they are going to impose on us. And we suggested that if government could initiate those measures, maybe we could avoid going to the IMF. But of course, the government has, better and further, as they say, information about the economy than, of course, we do. And so they saw that maybe there was a need, to go to the IMF now, especially given the situation that we found ourselves in. So what will it take for us to maybe avoid going to the IMF? We will have to, first, we'll have to learn to live within our means. There's no question about that. Because we cannot continue to have this very large fiscal deficits, and then we borrow and then accumulate debt, and then we get into this kind of situation. So, but living within our means, I mean, the question is what kind of means do we have? Now, as a country, our total revenue is just about $12 billion. So if we have to live within our means strictly, it means we must spend, either up to $12 billion or not very higher than $12 billion. That's what we have to do.
Can we?
Now, if we have to do that, we will even become a banana republic. Because $12 billion is peanuts for a whole country. I have comparative figures here to show that California, which is just a state in the United States, their annual revenue is $250 billion. Malaysia, that we used to compare ourselves with, their annual revenue is $55 billion. Now, South Africa's annual revenue is $90 billion. Ours is $12 billion. Okay? But it is because we don't collect enough taxes in this country. And I'm not talking about increasing tax rates, because the Ghanaians who are paying taxes are already overburdened. What we are talking about are the loopholes in our tax system that we need to plug. And I have a whole lot of them here. We've been talking about them forever. Tax exemptions, transfer pricing by companies, money laundering, trade misinvoicing, property taxes that we don't collect. Apart from the administrative inefficiencies, tax evasion and all that. And some experts have estimated that if we were to plug all these loopholes, we could raise our tax to GDP ratio from the current level of 12% to about 20%. We'll be able to double the taxes that we are currently collecting. But for some reasons, we don't see bold actions being taken in these areas. I'm happy to say that the tax exemptions bill was passed recently. But I've seen excerpts from the bill, and I'm really disappointed, because they still retain exemptions for so-called privileged persons. And I'm asking myself, who are these privileged persons? And in any case, the minister also has discretion to grant or not to grant. And then you believe that there will be something like protocol considerations and all that. So it means that we will not be able to realize the full benefits of even the tax exemptions.
Okay. So if you look at, finally, before I go to Hamdia Ismaila, if you look at, for instance, our total revenue, if you look at our expenditure, how much would you say we should be generating annually as a way of ensuring that we live within our means?
Oh, I'm saying that living within your means should always be your guiding principle. I mean, whatever revenue you are collecting, you try not to go too much above it. And I'm saying that if we have to live within our current means, we will reduce ourselves to a banana republic. So we have to enlarge the revenue envelope from 12 billion that we are collecting now to something like 20 billion. That's something that can be done within the next few years, 3 years, okay? But of course, when I talk about revenue side, I'm also interested in what is happening to the expenditure side, because we need to go there and cut the waste, rationalize expenditure. I mean, and then we can go in there and look at the size of the public sector. Our public sector has become so big. The civil service itself, we have added on more regions, more districts, more constituencies. You look at the size of government. So public compensation, has become a very big item in the government budget. We need to do something about that. The IMF is going to insist that they do something about that.
What should we do about that?
Cut the waste, reduce the size of government. Public compensation, you look at Article 71 office holders. Go in there And then look at the magnitude of the ex gratia and the retirement benefits and so on. We have to open that up. As a country, we have to do that. And if we do that, we'll be able to cut expenditure also at the same time that we are raising revenue. That's where we need to move this country and not sit down and say that we are going to live within our means. We are going to live within $12 billion, dollars. $12 billion is Bill Gates' pocket money. And that's the revenue for a whole country. We can't go on like this. And then finally, before I go off, I'll be talking a lot about our natural resource wealth that we have ceded to foreigners. And we are taking peanuts out of it because of the kind of fiscal regimes, unjust fiscal regimes that we have agreed with the foreigners. In fact, IEA, we have done some work, collected reliable information that is showing that, our natural resource wealth, from our gold, from our bauxite, iron ore, oil, manganese, gas. We are sitting on natural resource wealth that is valued in total over $10 trillion. $10 trillion. I have the information. Okay? But what we are even exploiting now, we give 80% away to foreigners and we take 20% at most. In some cases, we are even getting much less. So that is where Ghana is not a poor country. We are very rich. We are a very rich country, except that we are not exploiting our own natural resources and capacities, to transform this economy. And that's why we've been waiting 65 years, and we still have this gorgeous type of economy.
Okay. I'll get back to you because you've talked about the Article 71. I want to find out how about, the civil service also. But let me get to Humphrey Yimdake, just because you talked about, the achieving self-sufficiency and the fact that even our natural resources, when it comes to exploiting the natural resources, we give away 80% of it to foreigners, probably keep just 20%. I want you to talk about, Humphrey, I want you to talk about achieving self-sufficiency, the role of the private sector. Just pick a microphone and you could tell us what your thoughts are.
All right, thank you. Thank you, and once again, thank you to Atu and Kwamina for this platform and opportunity. And to the chairman, thank you for also giving us the opportunity to engage with the business community. Attaining self-sufficiency within the theme crafted, one would say that you then need to identify the structures that would guarantee the revenue streams that will lead to the sustainability of your projected needs, wants, that forms part of your expenditure. So it therefore goes back in the context of our country and in contemporary times that what are the structures of the economy? How robust are they to guarantee the sustainability as the questioner has tabled? On the said note, it therefore leads us back to what the opening remarks of the MDA of Graphic, Atu and Kwamina, espoused in their presentation. The structure of our economy goes way back to the pre-colonial era, and that has been the challenge, government upon government, desirous of transforming the set structure to create structures that will lead to the sustainability of, one, the mining sector, which is the extractive industry. Because as captured, we are still aware most of the raw materials coming from the extractive industries are exported in its raw state. And once you do that as a primary product, in the efficiency model of developing an economy, the factor stage gives you a lot of raw materials and cheap labor. And if you are not able to enhance that factor stage, that will give you further structures to add value to the raw stage and gives you higher income in that particular sector, that becomes the value addition that industrialists and proponents of various economic models say that we need to move from the factor stage to the manufacturing stage, where precision and manufacturing becomes the hallmark. The value addition stage then guarantees you the relevant, sustainable income to aid you meet the theme as to whether we can live within our means and attain a successful economy. So the structure of the economy over the period, and this can be found in our various textbooks, and the various earlier speakers have already mentioned it, I don't seek to belabor the point, has been weak because we are still very focused in the primary export of our product. In between the period pre-colonial to date, we used to export gold, timber, and cocoa. Today it's moved from gold, cocoa, and oil, and it's still in the raw state. About 60% of this that are exported are still in the raw state. And as long as you do that in the raw state, you cannot be sustainable in terms of revenue streams that will meet your various needs and wants of your country. So the limited resources as a result of still existing in the pre-colonial structure becomes a hindrance, and therefore it becomes challenging to meet the theme whether we can live within our means. Because day in, day out, as you seek not to correct the wrongs, the pressure that comes on the country and the populace by virtue of an even distribution of wealth, it leads to rural-urban migration. And that then brings a lot of social pressure in terms of infrastructure pressure, in terms of pro-poor interventions, and various concerns on central government. And bear in mind, in the same structure, over the period, a number of liberalization policies that have been engaged have exposed the entire country and the structure of the economy. This liberalization policy led to diversification of a lot of state-owned enterprises, and also led to a lot of informality. Don't you be surprised to realize the extent of informality in Ghana and the space that the SMEs and that of the consequences of the informality brings to bear on a country. It leads to low income, low skills, low taxation, and many more of this structure. So the extent of our country, or the structure of our country, then you could see a lot of streetism, you see a lot of retailing, servicification, which is the service industry, then dominates the structure of your economy. Once these are the growth path of your economy, sustainability becomes a challenge because the value addition process is limited. And once that is the case, the ramifications then continues. The one who asks, what has been the national plan to aid and reversing these various challenges as captured?
Okay.
And then once that cannot be well-defined and situated, you will still have these cyclical issues going on and unsustainable structure going forward.
So you talk about manufacturing, you talk about value addition. What I would want to find out from you briefly is, for the Association of Ghana Industries, for instance, what's been the difficulty? All the things you talk about, all the things you say we should do, what's been the difficulty? What's the challenge?
Well, I stated it that the biggest challenge is the structure of the economy and the inability to get decision makers, government in, government out, to support the value addition process of primary product to the manufacturing stage. And I gave you the factor stage and I gave you the investment stage. And today, by virtue of the fourth revolution, the deployment of digital and technology becomes a leveraging factor on the second stage, which is the manufacturing stage, that then will leapfrog and bring efficiency into production. And then that is when you get real income or value added, then that will give you sustainable incomes. So the real challenge has technically been the structure, and you need a government-led environment to propel investors, entrepreneurs to take the advantage. Because if government, by virtue of its policy, and there are inconsistency in policy, there's no way an investor or a promoter of a business will jump into the fray. So policy inconsistency is one of the clear challenges in such space. You will go beyond that. Beyond policy inconsistency, implementation, evaluation, feedback method of very good policies, working through the value chain to meet the intended goal of the policy is another difficulty. The cliche has always been that Ghana, we have the capacity to formulate very good policies. But when it comes to implementation, along the value chain, the intent can be tweaked by virtue of maybe political interference, personal gains, corruption. You could proceed and name a list of, is it the fear of the voter because of the nature of your constitutional structure? Because I recall one clear one that AGI had really been advocating on, which is the benchmark discount value. We know the harm that it has caused to the nation. What was the inertia? Why couldn't government stand its grounds and correct the wrongs as much as they appreciated that the said policy had a negative impact on our various enterprises and the loss of money? One very good example in that said context is, once upon a time, a commissioner did say the country is losing over 9 billion Ghana cedis by virtue of that policy. And we said that is more than that, as a result of the aggregate impact that we haven't analyzed from industry perspective. And we keep saying, once the policy is wrong, manufacturers will not fight government. We'll only go back and enjoy the fray and we'll all start importing. Because they might have more resources than the average retail importer. And that will distort the economy, distort your city, the cyclical issues will keep going. We're just wondering and only praying that the exchange rate will not hit 12 cities by the end of year, considering the rate at which it is going. The foundation and the structure, it's a challenge.
Great. Talking about if things do not change, the manufacturers will join the fray. Is that what you're doing?
Well, the question you need to ask, is that what the policy seeks?
But is that what you're doing? Is that a reality?
To the questioner, I said that is not the appropriate question. Because there's always a guide, and that's why there's always an investment climate that decision makers are given power to direct. And over the years, 30 years and beyond, the inability to create jobs over 30 years as a result of the unwillingness of successive governments to deliberately champion the agri-value chain, the various value chain from the auto industry, the aluminum integrated lines, the inertia of government. Is it the fear of the people? Is it the fear of the voter? Is it a leadership concern? That should be the route of the question, not whether we are joining by virtue of inappropriate policy. Survival comes into being. I'm an individual. Investors are individual. Government has a collective interest. And under Article 36, the directive principle of state policy, government has the mandate and the obligation to create the right environment. And if they do not, well, you do not blame the citizens, but you look at the bigger picture. That's how I'll go about it.
So, I mean, let me just, I asked simply because you said, if you do not do this, as a survival mechanism, you may have to change and do what others are doing. My simple question is that the situation now?
So then the economists, put the terminology, all things being equal, all right? We do what is needful. So the foundation and the equilibrium must be properly set so they don't go about blaming. So therefore, we advocate for the right policies of government to create the enabling environment for investors and manufacturers. And therefore, when you state the right environment, you will not get investment or investors disinvesting and putting the city under pressure and moving their money. The right policies is what we need to champion and hold government to it to make sure right policies are set and given the time of gestation, maturity, and growth.
Great. Thank you. Humphrey. Let's get to Hamdia Ismaila, and she'll be telling us how we can sustain growth by financing the real sectors while cushioning the vulnerable. Over to you, Hamdia.
Thank you, and a very good morning to all of you. Thank you for this program, Graphic and Stanbic, and thank you, Chairman, for setting the pace. I think I wouldn't want to belabor a point because Dr. Kwache and Humphrey have said a lot of it. I want to look at financing and investment. Dr. Kwache did mention the fact that the entire revenue for the country is about 12 billion. And if we want to live within that means, it's just not going to be possible. We're going to be a banana republic, which is so true. And he did mention that perhaps we could, within the next few years, increase that revenue to about 20 billion, which is true, and I can even say more, we can do that. And Humphrey has just also laid down the issues of the structure of the economy. So the whole issue is on the structure of the economy. And he did mention in terms of support, and most of what is missing is the financing. We need, most of our efforts have been that government is borrowing to do certain things. Expenditure is high, and we are using most of the monies to do infrastructure. That is not returning. To be able to increase our tax revenues, create more jobs, and build resilience around the economy, we need to invest and we need to finance. Our biggest challenge in Ghana, I think, is that we don't have a very robust financial delivery system. Our financial services industry is very debt-focused. Everything in Ghana is about credit. And the needs of really building businesses goes beyond just credit. You need more. So we need a well-diversified financial services industry that could support anything from startups to early stage, to growth business, to mature business, and to distress. And if we don't have those types of financing available, we probably will not be able to be self-sufficient, because for government to increase its tax revenue, we need to create jobs, we need to widen the bracket. So Dr. Kwache had mentioned revenue, the taxpayer already is overburdened because we have very limited number of people on the tax bracket in terms of pay as you earn and those things. You look at Senate, and there are less than just about 2 million Ghanaians paying taxes at the end of every month. We are 30 million. How can 2 million people pay taxes to finance 30 million people? So basically, we are starting from zero. So how do we move even up to having about 10 million, on payroll, so that we can have those taxes? They are automatic. In fact, by the time my salary hits my accounts, the GRA has already received the payee tax, right? Like all of us here. So then what it means is that is one of the most automatic things government can do. So we need to finance businesses that could create jobs. Currently, most of the businesses, we are financing jobs outside of Ghana, because the more you are importing, you're actually exporting manufacturing outside. And exporting manufacturing outside implies that you are creating jobs somewhere else. And it is because we are not having the right kind of financing to support the right kinds of businesses to grow and to develop and to create the jobs. We have done a lot of entrepreneurship programs, but that does not really bring a lot of the money home. So for me, anytime I look at it, we need a more broader look in our financial services industry and ensure that anytime that anybody needs money to expand, to grow, to start a business, there is a certain kind of financing for them. We blame banks all the time that they are not lending to the SMEs. Certain SMEs are not ready for bank money. We need to get other forms of money. There are alternatives. And so we need to look at that. On the policy side, we have a lot of money we can mobilize domestically. So we moved as a country from a pension system that is very government-dominated to a private pension system where we have deregulated it essentially. Just from 2010 to now, we have assets of over 30 billion being managed by private pensions. And all this money still goes into government bonds. If we can even allocate certain amounts of money into the real sector, because the real sector is where the jobs are created. That is where we feed ourselves. And so if we are not paying attention to the real sector and everything we are doing is very superficial, then this is what we're going to be seeing. And we're going to continue to see this for a long time. And to be able to get ourselves out of this, we need to be able to begin to look at the real sector, invest along the value chain. From where I sit, we have invested in some companies. In fact, we've invested in some cocoa processing companies. Even getting cocoa as a cocoa processing factory in Ghana is difficult. Raw material is a big problem. So manufacturing sector has issues from finance, from raw material, from dealing with the tax agencies and all that. And so people are just beginning to see that, as Humphrey said, what is easier for a business person? You need to really also live within your means, right? So if you are spending more and you are not generating enough revenue, then you need to do what is necessary. And that is what I think we are seeing. People are checking out. People are shutting down their business. They are changing their monies and they are taking their monies back home. There is so much pressure on the city. And to be able to ensure that we are able to build a robust economy that is well resilient, we need to diversify our financial services industry in terms of the way we support businesses to start, grow, and develop. I think I'll just end this.
Thank you very much, Hamdia. Now, in ending, you talked about how you've invested in certain companies. You've talked about how, managers of pension funds have resorted to investing in government bonds. I want us to practicalize this. Really, would any entity want to engage in investing in other sectors when he's not sure what he would get, rather than investing in a risk-free government bond?
Dr. Kwachi is here, but that notion of risk-free is actually a problem, right? Dr. Kwachi talked about a lot of arrears, right? And so I think we live in an illusion that, government is risk-free. But wait a minute, let's also look at it this way, that if we want to put all the money to government to borrow and to do infrastructure, and businesses are not producing anything, what are we getting? So I think there should be a certain level of intentionality in the things we do. Other countries have done it, right? You cannot put short-term money into a long-term, investment. You can only put long-term investment in long-term, asset to be able to generate something. And so, while the regulator has done its work, because right now the regulator allows the pension funds to do certain kinds of investment, they've allowed them to do alternatives. They haven't done it, and I think, as you said, it has to do with the fact that, there is a risk-free premium in investing in government. So why should we? And that is where the issue of policy comes in. We have to necessarily make a policy and give flaws to what can be done, because we need to be bold and we need to make decisions that are hard, that could take us somewhere. He talked about being 60 years still exporting raw material. I don't want my grandchildren to still see the Ghana we are seeing today. Every 4 years we are running to the IMF. But self-sufficiency is where you put your money where your mouth is, generally. And so we must learn to do that.
We must learn to do that. I have a lot of questions. It's not all about me, so I'm going to get to all of you shortly. But as part of the things you're supposed to address for us is, while we do all of these, also cushioning the vulnerable. Yes, you do that briefly for us, and then
Yes.
we get to.
For sure. I mean, as a country, I think we have some very pragmatic policies in supporting the vulnerable, right? So we have one program that actually has really been well rated, the LEAP program, that support the vulnerable in our society. We have the National Health Insurance Scheme, we have all that. The issue always has to be on the execution side, right? And it all has to do with the fiscals and how to really be able to finance these things. We have seen the issues around school feeding where there is no even food for the students. And it is all because of the fiscals. We can't borrow to do these things if we are not really generating more income as a country to be able to finance the vulnerable. So really, even getting ourselves into a state of difficulty actually makes it worse for the vulnerable. So we really have to be able to do more to be able to support the vulnerable more. But in financing businesses, when businesses are formalized and they are doing the right things, what happens is that there are regulations that ensure that workers' compensation, health insurance, all those things are there to be able to cushion those who are vulnerable also within us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Hamdia. Thank you very much, Humphrey. Thank you very much, John. It's your turn now, and so you just show by hand. We'll get a microphone to you. You tell us your name and the institution you represent, and then you can ask your question, and we'll get the panelists addressing the question. So let's go back. Who else is interested in asking a question? Okay, so let's take the first set of three, and then we'll get here for the panelists to address the questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Amponsa-Boatin. I think that we have been discussing how we can help to move the nation forward. And year in, year out, we come here. I just want to make a few recommendations that will help the government. One is that CEOs of the state-owned enterprises, most of them have failed. They run the business as if, I don't know, they make losses. It's only a few of them who are doing so well. I don't want to mention names, but we know if they continue to make huge losses, why won't they sign a performance contract so that if the person that is not able to work as expected, you just fire the person? Two, we have been saying that you've not been able to raise the tax revenue that we need. It is because people are not compliant. And it is so because some of the tax rates are too high. I'm a tax analyst. And if you look at the PAYE, you agree with me that somewhere in 2018, in August, because the government needed revenue and found that the easiest means was to look at the PAYE, they brought in the rate of 35%. Come to think of now, it is 30%. That is the one that is at the highest level. What it means is that individuals are even paying more than the corporate bodies. The other day, I was with the former finance minister. We were discussing the issue of whether Ghana should go to the IMF or not. And I told them that, look, we don't need to go to the IMF because we have not been able to exhaust all the means that we can to raise the money. Okay. Now, I also mentioned the cost of doing business in Ghana. I have friends who do business. There's one friend, I was with him last night. He said, look, Eric, within the last 3 months, because of the depreciation of the cedi, I've lost 350,000 cedis. So I have to shut down one of my businesses. Okay. The other issue is that most people who want to put their money into economic activities, they look at the fact that fuel cost is high, interest rates are high. If you put your money in there, the probability that you'll be able to retrieve the money and even make profit is very low. So just put your money in the T-bills where you are sure that you have your money. And so if all these things happen, Then as a nation, I don't know. We always say that we should live within our means. What I would say is that if you're not living within your means, you can't even think properly, because every time you are looking at how to cut corners, how to do all that. So I think all of us know, those at the very top, we all know. But I think we need somebody who will be bold enough and say that I want to take a decision and do this, cut down the number of people who work within the government.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please let's make it brief so that we can have many of you asking questions. But the bit about performance contracts, yes, now CEOs of state-owned enterprises are signing performance contracts. That's something that has been started now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, the topic, my name is Seth Chumakobwa. I work with the Association of Ghana Industries as CEO. The topic of discussion, living within your means. I think from business point of view, living within your means does not necessarily mean expenditure and revenue. In other words, you are not necessarily matching expenditure against revenue. It also includes investment. So you may generate so much revenue, but your expenditure could be slightly higher or more because you also bring in investment. That investment could come in the form of borrowings, equity, and all that. For a typical business person, when you have such investment, what you want to do is to channel it to areas that will generate future income as well. So your stream of income will be better and paying for whatever debt you have. The question I have then is to Dr. Kwachi, that looking at the Ghana situation, the investment we are making, the borrowings we are doing, the debt we have, are we channeling them to future streams of income? Are we channeling them to the productive sector, which can generate us future streams of income so that it supports our economy and then help our revenue generation in the future? In that case, then we could say the borrowings are good. So what does the data say? Are we channeling them, the borrowings, to proper investment that will bring us future stream of income? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Seth. I think there's someone here who wanted to ask a question. Yes.
Nana, Dr. Mike Ejekum Ado, CEO of Mikado Holdings. It's not only one business, several. Mine is not a question, okay, but it's a contribution.
Sure, please go ahead.
You have about 3 minutes?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I would like us to look at our economy right now from your own home perspective. What is Ghana? What is the world? If you are not talking about your own home as a family, it's the government. As a family, it's a country. Now, if you now marry, you have 1, 2 children, and you are handling your economy within that family, and it's not working well, how do you expect Ghana to work well? Why are divorcing rates increasing? Because we are not handling our economy within the family properly. So I have 4. My acronym is MUTE. Mistakes, emotional expenditure. W is waste or leakages, and T is technology. These are the 4 areas that we have to address within this country if you want to make it. So as I'm talking, just look at your own family and see whether these things work. The first one is mistakes. We all know the mistakes that we are doing, we are making as a country. And we seem not to correct the mistake because we are aware, but we don't take the implementation as to how to correct the mistakes. So when you make a mistake, according to Chief Kera, the first thing is to accept that you've made a mistake. Be you a wife, a husband, a child, or whatever, in your family. Accept it. Number 2, don't dwell on it. As a country, as a people, we like dwelling on mistakes and trying to rationalize the mistake that we did, giving excuses. And look at your own self, the kind of defense that you give to your wife or your husband. Why are you defending? You take it as an attack. Why did you come home late? And then you are defending. Why didn't you give the chop money? Then you are defending. So I call it Ghanaians like giving excuses. And the more you give excuses, the more poor you become. So we should avoid the excuses. Trying to pass the buck. Blame other people. Blame yourself. That is mistakes. Number 3, now accept it immediately. Don't dwell on it. And then learn from it. Learn from the mistakes, the defense that you've been giving. Learn from it. And 4, don't repeat it. We keep on repeating our mistakes as a country, which means that we did not do the first 3. We know we've made a mistake. You have accepted. Then you dwell on it, giving excuses. You are not learning from it, and so you keep on repeating. So please, members here, if you make a mistake at home, accept it immediately, apologize. Don't dwell on it. Please stop these defenses that you've been giving. Learn from it and never repeat it. That's number 1. Number 2 is the emotional expenditure. As a country, we have a problem with trying to defend ourselves. Emotional expenditure, what is it? We are always pouring libation and condemning our enemies. Who is your enemy? It's an emotional expenditure that we have to tackle, my dear friends. We want to please our loved ones and condemn our enemies. All you know, your enemy is putting you on track, giving you criticisms for which you should be aware and do the right thing. But because of this emotional expenditure, you want to shame him. So you do things that you may not necessarily have to do. Just to please the public. To show to the public that this is my opposition, this is my enemy, I will shame him. And that will put pressure on your expenditure. Meanwhile, your income is so small. But you want to please. And so you are making more and more mistakes. Emotional expenditure. Let us work on it. And then in the same vein, you are trying to please your loved ones. Unnecessarily spending money on them. It will also bring your problem, your economy down. Waste. There's so much waste. We have these government factories that we are not renovating or refurbishing, but rather we do new ones. It's a waste. So in your own home, look at how much food that you spend and then you waste it. Here I was watching your tables. Some of you have collected a lot of food and you are throwing it away. It's serious. Money is a spiritual paper. It's not ordinary paper. Otherwise, you can tear or burn it. But money is a spiritual paper. And the food is money. So the moment you throw away food, it will be telling you, I will not come back to you. And as a country, we waste so much food. Okay. And so that spiritual paper will not come back to us. That's why I asked for some few minutes.
Last one. We need to
because we are learning.
Sure.
Okay. So that is the waste. So I have to stop the waste. Because there are a lot of leakages, which we have already discussed. It's also very important. If you want to address how to live within our means, these are the areas. And then finally, the technology. We don't have that kind of people to service our industries. Mr. Humphrey, we should tell them that we don't have that. We've been talking about expatriates coming to the pharmaceutical manufacturing. We don't have the people to handle our machines. So we have to employ. And if you employ, you have to pay more. So, my dear friends, I want to sit down, but there are other areas that you have to address. But see Ghana within your own family and see how best you can solve your problem. Then Ghana will also solve our problems.
Thank you very, very much.
I have all these ideas in this book that I want to leave to you guys as a legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get to the panelists. And to you, Dr. John Kwache, Seth Chumakwabwa was asking the question, are we channeling our, the monies that we borrow into sectors of the economy that could regenerate the income?
Well, what the data shows, if you look at the structure of the budget, is that increasingly we've been spending a lot more of our revenue on recurrent expenditure, whilst we've been squeezing the capital expenditure. That's at the aggregate level. That's what you see if you look at the budget. In fact, our development budget expenditure is less than 5% of our total GDP. And that's not good enough. You know, as a developing country, you should be spending at least 10 to 15% of your GDP on capital expenditure. That is what is going to grow the economy. You know, but our budget is now consumed entirely by compensation, interest payments, transfers to, government units, most of which is recurrent, if you want to call it consumption expenditure. But of course, you see the evidence in the nature of our roads. A country that doesn't have a railway system. We don't have an airline. We don't have a shipping, line. We don't have an oil refinery, So all these things should tell you that we are not making enough investments. And therefore, when we talk about expenditure rationalization, we're talking about the need to rebalance the expenditure away from the recurrent, spending towards capital expenditure, because that is what is going to grow the economy. And for some reasons, our economic managers, they continue to do what I'm talking about. They see that capital expenditure is being increasingly squeezed. But because they have to take care of the others, compensation and interest and so on, they leave it at that. And I'm saying that is not good enough for the long-term, growth of this economy.
Great. So the others were contributions. Let's go for the next batch of questions. Please show by hand. We'll get a microphone to you. Okay.
Good morning, and thank you very much. My name is Frank Osejima from Methodist University. My problem is that Ghanaians always want to attribute governance to the executive. We really do not understand government. And therefore, everything we want should come from the top. And the individuals that we are supposed to participate will fail on our part. And that is exactly what Mr. Mikaido said. I would believe that if this nation should move forward, we need to have a mandatory or compulsory national development plan. A concerted plan where for the first 4 years or 5 years, if any government wants to come, this is what the country wants to do in the next 4 years. If you are coming from any political party, what is it that you are going to add up? Because I believe that if I apply for a job at your end, you ask me, what am I bringing on board? That is what we need to do. And then immediately after our politics, we put them aside. And then we focus on the agenda for the nation. When Madame Hamdia was talking about something, she said about the infrastructure that is not returning. Yes. If you go around, you can see that a particular government came, spent money or borrowed money, decided to build an infrastructure to help salvage the economy. But somewhere along the line, it was stopped because that government is no more in power. Forgetting that we have borrowed to implement or construct that project. And therefore, this accumulates our debt. And so if it is that we all have a plan, an agreed plan, that we want to build schools, about 20 schools, in the next 4 years, you come, you make it your target, you build a 20. If you are able to build 22, it is a plus to your government. Let us change some of the things that we have in our constitution, People were of the view that Article 71 or 77, 71, we need to blah, 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 blah. Why? We have to sit and accept that this thing is not working for us. Okay. And therefore, NDPA should sit up and let us all work together for the good of this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see a hand here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed Tofik Bida, and my question is to all the three panelists. I want to ask if they are really sure that the problem is the Gagisbek economy, or because I think even with the Gagisbek economy we are not handling it properly. The over-reliance on cocoa and natural resources. Even cocoa, we are struggling to hit 1 million ton. And I'm a manufacturer, I do palm oil. And we can't even find palm fruits to buy. We are competing with other big ones. And for palm oil, I'm competing with Nigerians who come to buy. It's not even enough. If there's any economy or any term that could be worse than Gagisbek economy, I think I could have easily said that of Saudi Arabia, because they have only crude oil. But look at them. With only crude oil, the type of things they do, the living conditions of their people, they even have to reimburse them and all that. Okay. So I want us to really ask, is it that even with the Gagisbek economy we are not managing it properly? There's, I don't want to say incompetence because it's quite high, but are we managing even the Gagisbek economy that we have, the common factors of production? Our land, if you have to get a farm to farm, how do you access the land? If, as a young person, even if you have to build a house for accommodation and all that, how do you get the land? So that's my question again. Is the Gagisbek economy really the problem? Or how we are even managing it, that is the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You know, when you asked the question, then you answered it. But I will still put it to the panelists, you know, even though you have answered the question and said that you don't think it's the Gagisbek economy. Final one.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Nasebwedi. I just want to say two things. This is a time for us to also start looking at the proper embrace and integration of technology into what we do, especially digital technology. And number two, start making data-driven decisions, where you don't just make decisions and invest based on what you've always done, but look at the data and look at insight, look at context before you start investing. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, final one. I think there's a final hand here because our time is up.
Yeah, my name is Sheba Masood, faculty from the University of Massachusetts. Dr. Kwachi mentioned about the size of California and also the revenue they generate every year. Now, from my little experience in the United States, real estate tax is one of the biggest focus of what revenue generation of any nation, city, or a town. So my question is, if Ghana government is to focus on real estate tax, property taxes, so how much, what will be the, what percentage of the total revenue that we need to generate would come from that?
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Let me get to the panelists to answer the questions. And I'll start off with you, Dr. John Kwachi, because the other question also comes from a point that you made. If you could please pick the microphone and...
What question was addressed to me?
Well, the first question was whether it's really the problem, whether the problem is really the Gagisbek economy.
Yeah, but yes, we have been saying this, that we are still like a colonial economy. I mean, 65 years after independence. In other words, we are still exporting, primary commodities. We don't add much value, to it. our manufacturing sector today contributes just about 12% of GDP, or even probably less. In fact, 1970, if you go back to 1970, the manufacturing sector was even bigger, contributing about 15%, at least 15% of GDP. So it looks like, as a country, we have rather de-industrialized, because Kwame Nkrumah created a big industrial structure which has been torn down. So we are still a God-based economy. You said it's not being managed well. Yes, that's what we are all saying here. We are not managing the economy as well as some of us would have expected it to be done. Well, my friend talks about California. When I decided to use that example, I was warned that California is a different economy from Ghana. But I just wanted to quote it as to demonstrate that they are just 38 million, but the economy as a state, just a state, is able to mobilize 250 billion. I just wanted to make the comparison. And we are 30 million, and then our revenue is just, 12 billion. I don't know whether at this stage you want me to give my concluding remarks.
Please do.
Okay. I think I'll stick to my text so that I can be a bit consistent and coherent. I've said that what we, I haven't said before is that as a country, we need to build economic and financial buffers, so that when there's a big shock like this, we can better withstand the shock. That is what we haven't done all these years. And some of the components of this, these buffers will be the fact that, in fact, we should live within our means. That's one. But most importantly, in economics, we say that you should keep positive primary balances. If you do that, you bring your borrowing and debt on a downward trajectory over time. So we should make sure we do that. I would wish that, in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, where they have placed a ceiling on borrowing, 5%, we should also, not borrowing, the deficit, we should also add a ceiling on borrowing. Because our policymakers have this penchant of, just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And sometimes I think some of the borrowing even goes outside the deficit that has been declared to Parliament. Because you can do off-budget borrowing. Sometimes I think that also happens. So if we put in the law that there should be a ceiling on borrowing, we should create a minimum level of foreign exchange reserves. Maybe for certain months of import cover. We should create a sinking fund to take care of our future, debt payments. A fund, we pay monies into it so that if we have to pay our debt, we can, fall on it. The oil stabilization fund, we let the minister go in there and cap it at any level that he chooses. We should avoid that so that we have a substantial amount of fund, sitting there. And then also the sovereign fund, this is a heritage fund, also should be, of course, now it's ring-fenced. No, nobody can touch that. That's good. And then we should have an infrastructure, development fund so that we can support infrastructure development in the country. Yeah, finally, let me say that living within our means should continue to be our guiding principle so that we avoid recurrent of relapses into economic imbalances and financial crisis that compel us to go to the IMF. We should, however, not be complacent with our current level of revenue. This is what I've been stressing. Living within our means doesn't mean that we should sit back and say, oh, we are comfortable with 12 billion. We can raise that envelope, the revenue envelope, by all the means that I mentioned. And then, if we have to live within our means, then we'll know that we have enough resources, to spend on the economy. And then we are also talking about, I said, we should take ownership of our natural resources. We should be able to leverage our internal resources to support the transformation of this economy away from the Gojisbeck economy. Well, why our people, our economic managers don't do this, I have no idea. And it's all because of the politics, we put political considerations above, the economic interests. This MPP, NDC, business, duopoly or whatever it is, it's just crippling this economy, this country. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. John Kwache. Let me get to you, Hamdia.
Thank you. So I think you probably heard when I said that our challenge in terms of real sector financing also has to do with raw material. So for example, I don't understand why you should compete on raw material. So we don't have enough raw material already, and then we are exporting more raw material. And it is not only in oil palm, it actually cuts across, cereal and, and all other crops that you can think of. So it's something we need to do, and we need to also begin to think about financing along the value chain, because that is where you can actually maintain production. You see that companies shut down at some point because there's no raw material. And there are certain sectors that if you invest in, you may have to produce for like 3-4 months, and then shut down the company and wait for the season to start for you to get raw material. Otherwise, then you have to put in more working capital to stock. So it's a big challenge that we need to look at it to support the manufacturing sector in particular. But what I want to say is that firm dynamics are intimately connected with the business environment and the quality of the public institutions. Structural reforms in general, and more particularly those affecting the market functioning and general framework conditions, relates to, for example, formalities to start a business, the quality of our judicial system, insolvency regulations, red tape, innovation, among other things, should be those of the things we should highlight in the policy areas. I have already mentioned that a key policy action is to make sure that we have a robust and a more diversified financial service delivery system, capable of financing new business activities and lends to viable firms, in particular those with high growth potential, leading to massive jobs. As we speak, a lot of the jobs, we are exporting them. We want to create jobs, we are actually exporting jobs, because the moment you are importing manufacturing goods, you are paying for the jobs outside of the country. And that's a challenge. So the role of the financial sector cannot be overemphasized. We have the financial sector, we have the real sector. The idea is to have the financial sector support the real sector so that we can do better as a country. We need to have a financial services industry, not only banks, that are capable of financing Ghana, because that's what we need. Otherwise, a lot of these things, it will continuously be a conversation that we really may not be able to get a lot of what we want to see happen. But we can do that and make sure that we make Ghana a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Hamdia. Finally, Humphrey.
All right, let me take the first two questions. One on the Guggisberg economy. And in my explanation, I did mention the factor stage of an economic growth path. That really gives emphasis on natural resources, a number of factors of production, cheap labor, and that you could see the characteristics within your very palm industry and also in our economy. Is it being managed well? Over the years, we believe by now, we should have moved from that factor stage to the manufacturing stage, which is a sophisticated stage, using machinery, precision, value addition. When you had moved that way to that extent, you don't glut in the first stage, and therefore that movement would have tamed the urban drift, the rural urban drift. That would have put less pressure on the social interventions, social structures in the urban areas. These issues are all integrated. So yes, the level of management, even in the Guggisberg space, if you do not grow, if you do not move, they're crowding out. The population boom will create complications, and therefore that will put stress. And Hamdia did mention, even at that stage, because of the demand of revenue for government, the stress of even importing raw primary products, it's a concern. That value chain process has not been completed. And I'll give you a clear example. The planting for food and jobs, the intervention of fertilizer in the value chain. Beyond that, there was a lot of glut, but the aggregation to the one district, one factory stage was limited. The storage facilities was shortened. How then do you deploy data? He mentioned. How do you use digitization as part of the system to leverage in procurement, in aggregating, in distributing? When you're able to do that, there might be a necessity to ban the export of some primary product like palm, like cashew, like paddy rice from the farm gate, and storage and distribution would have guaranteed you enough raw materials to add value. When you add the value and then you export, that's the value chain. Then sustainability, as I described earlier, would have popped out, and then we could grow. So there's a need for the movement, and we need that consciousness and the drive to attain that. Once you seek to do that, there's one critical aspect, and Hamdia mentioned, what are we using our pensions funds for? Today, there's that cliche that government investments are risk-free. But in the era of rating agencies downgrading sovereign bonds and its complications, would we say that if government will not deliberately develop local content and create sustainability in the value chains and deliberately use the law and divert some of the pension funds into some strategic value addition companies, will have challenges? So to summarize my closing remarks, and I just do that quickly, and it says, there's one big challenge, and I believe we need to pose it back to the president of the land. In the era of the COVID, he made a very fantastic statement that resonated around the world. And he says, we do not know how to restore lives. And I'm paraphrasing. However, we know how to restore the economy. These words of his has come back for him to live beyond it and establish that, yes, we know how to restore the said economy. On the said note, in conclusion, living within our means an imperative for economic success. While it will be ideal in any scheme of things, it will be a tall order in the face of the realities of our economy and its structure. Unless structured, strategic, and intentional steps are taken to comprehensively reverse the pointers mentioned above, attaining the ideal of living within our means can be a mirage in the state of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Humphrey Ayimdake, who's CEO of Red Moon Resources and also the president of the Association of Ghana Industries. Thank you, Dr. John Kwacha, who's Director of Research, Institute of Economic Affairs. And thank you also, Hamdia Ismaila, who is General Manager of Venture Capital Trust Fund. But before we wrap it all up, let me just indicate that there are questionnaires on each table. So please fill those questionnaires before you leave. We'll now invite the chairman for his closing remarks. Let's welcome Professor Eric Osei-Sibe.
Thank you. I hope you all agree with me that the panelists have really done a good job, done justice to the topic. So I think with another round of applause, let's thank our panelists for really breaking things down for us. And I really took copious notes. Time is fast spent, but I'll try to just summarize a few key points so that we can quickly get out of here. So the key thing, I think three key things that I would like to talk about is largely about the issue of productivity, the fact that as a country, we seem to have very low productivity. We have not added value to our raw materials. We have not tackled the bottlenecks along the value chain of our production. And so that really means that once you're producing at that low level of productivity, your exports is low, your pricing, your cost of production per unit cost of production is high, and so from the word go, you become an inflationary state, right? So everything you produce will not be competitive, and therefore you will not be able to export more, your inflationary levels will go up, your interest rates will be high, and it comes back to increase prices further. So that has been a bane, that has been a problem that we have. So to solving that is to making sure that we really tackle our productive base. As a country, the borrowing that we're doing, somebody asked, what have we used the borrowing for? I think that is where we need to channel it to. How do we make sure that this money goes into the productive sectors of the economy? That will reduce inefficiencies, that will remove the bottlenecks, that will enhance efficiency or productivity, so that our per unit cost of production is much reduced, our transaction cost is reduced, we reduce inflation, and we will be able to have much more stable and competitive macroeconomic environment. These are key to ensure that we generate revenue for our people, for the country. We are able to generate employment for people, and we are able to bring in a lot more foreign currency to be able to show weakening our currency by the day. This is important. Now, the other thing that really strikes me was Dr. Humphrey talking about the issue of policy inconsistency and policy coherent as a country. Currently, we really do not have any blueprint that guides our policy. And what is the implication of that? What is the ramification of we not being able to have a blueprint? And even more importantly, the fact that our policies are not driven by evidence. Evidence-based policy decision-making has been lacking. And so, I mean, in an economy where if you don't have research, I mean, one good thing, I'm a researcher, as a researcher, research actually reduces the likelihood of you making ad hoc responses to problems. And that has been one of the problems that we have. We seem to have very ad hoc responses to problems. Policy formulation, which are not based on evidence and research that will guide us as to the response. What will be the response of the people to this policy? What is the scope? To what extent will we get the desired result? And how long would it take us to get the result? We need to, before we come out with policy, we should have done enough research to be able to know, the end from the beginning, which we don't do much. So you bring in the policy and, it will hit a snag, and then we have to pull back, and then we'd have wasted a whole lot of time. So that is really a problem as a country, and this, transfers through. I mean, from the very beginning, where we don't pay much attention. If you look at the East Asian Pacific countries, the South Korea and others, they have really used research in formulation of their policies and policy reforms, and that is where they are today. So this is key. And so just ending, I think that I would want to repeat, because one of the contribution and the input that was made by our dear father, I think is very profound, and really I want to rehash that, for this economy to move forward, the idea of was it MU or what that we talked about? Yes. I mean, we accepting our mistakes. This is important, because if you don't accept your mistake, you never learn from it. We're not dwelling on this mistake and wasting precious time is key, right? And learning from it, resetting the economy. I think the time has come that we have to reset our economy. I mean, from the Gettysburg time to making sure that we begin to focus on the most important levers of this economy, the productive sector. Until we solve the productive rigidities and bottlenecks, we are not going anywhere. It's a problem. And we're not repeating these mistakes. The reason why we keep going to the IMF and all of that is the fact that we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. The fiscal malaise and fiscal indiscipline that we keep recording, borrowing and putting it into consumption, not into growth-enhancing areas. And then, the issue of waste. How do we plug the wastage, the loopholes in our system, corruption, and all the things that we see around ourselves has been the biggest bane of this economy. Inefficiencies in our public financial management system is a problem. We need to solve that. We need to ensure value for money, to making sure that our investments really bring in the necessary returns that will be plowed back into this economy. And then, most importantly, the fact of technology is important, is key. The know-how, the brother talked about data-driven decision-making. It's important, the know-how, how to do it, the technology to do it. We need to learn from best practices. We're talking about privatization, liberalization, not help. I would not say that liberalization has really not helped, because we talk about the state-owned enterprise. The key issue has been the governance system and the management that we put in place. Because if you still maintain this state-owned enterprise where the governance system, as somebody talked about, the CEO is not really performing, then, of course, you need to liberalize and give it to the private sector, because we've seen over the years that the private sector is much more efficient in running companies and firms than the states. And so these are the key issues that I think we can all carry with. So with this few words, if they are, really, I would want to bring this session to a close, and I want to really thank our panelists again for a good job done. I think they really done justice to the theme, and really thank also our MC for really steering the affairs very well. And to all of you for your contribution. It has really been informative. You've really made very good input, and I do hope that the duty bearers and the powers that be, the policymakers, are listening to us, and they will do the needful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Eric Osesibe, and thanks to all of you for making time to be here. Big thank you to the panelists. We're live on Joy 99.7 FM and also live on the Joy News channel. My name is Winston Amwa. Do have a lovely day.
For more news, visit graphic.com.gh or log on to Facebook at Daily Graphic and on YouTube at Graphic GH.
Subscribe now.